of course, it's obvious without any question, well, I'm suffering because my job boss sacked me. I'm, of course, suffering because my husband hurt me. I'm suffering because I've got a knee ache. So we assume automatically, without any question, that it's the problem is outside. And usually it feels unfair. It feels like it happened randomly, out of the blue, and we can't understand. First we know, look at this suffering, and the thing is, then we think, why is it happening to me? This is the normal world, right? We understand this. So then to here, even we just look at the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's view, Buddha's analysis of the world, and then his analysis of suffering. Already it blows our mind, because what we think of as suffering is just the first level, when the bad things happen. But then there are more subtle, more nuanced level of suffering that are too shocking for us. And then when we hear the causes of suffering, that's even more shocking, because he says the suffering is due to ourselves. Past karma, actions we did in the past, programming our mind that come into the future, and then those seeds we planted in the past play out in the present as our suffering. And second, what's in our mind itself. So it's such a different analysis that until we even hear that properly, to think about emptiness without referring it back to the Four Noble Truths and the basic principle that Buddha makes is that everything comes from the mind, it just makes no sense to us. It's just too intellectual. So in general, the point that Buddha's making, the point that underpins all of Buddha's methodology, is his view, his observation, and his analysis of the fact that what goes on in our mind is the main source both of our suffering and of our happiness. In other words, what goes on in the mind is the source of who we are. We create ourselves. What we do with our mind produces what happens to us. That's really what Buddha's saying, not just this life, but life to life. So it's a very, very, very different view. So another way to put that is that the neurotic parts of our mind, when we study the mind itself in the middle scope of the Lam Rim, we learn that there are neurotic, deluded, afflicted states of mind that are the emotions that we talk about, the unhappy emotions like anger and attachment, that they have a particular function, a very specific function. This is unique to the Buddha's view, of misrepresenting the world to us. So like Lama Yeshe talks in his Mahamudra teachings, one way of thinking of the mind, this is very powerful, and again, not how we think at all, is that our mind is like a mirror, and that whatever appears in the mirror of our mind, in other words, whatever appears to us, how things appear to us, is dependent mainly on the state of the mirror. So if your mirror is crystal clear, then things will appear accurately. And this is the shocking point that Buddha is saying, there is a way you can say that things do exist. This is his whole point. This sounds like the worst kind of fundamentalist dogma to us. You know, like Buddha's made something up and then we're supposed to believe it. No. Buddha has observed the universe with his own mind. And then what Buddhism is essentially his presentation of how it exists. That's it. So what he's saying is there is a way to present how things exist. In other words, there is a way to say that things have a valid way of existing. And this is very shocking to us, because as one fellow said recently in a class, and it's a very good question, well, who says? Who says it's like that? Who says that's right? That's a really good question. Well, you know, when it comes to Christianity, who says it is God. And then God is the one who created it. He didn't just observe it. God actually created it. So then, of course, if you have faith in God, you believe God. That's one view. But the other view is really powerful. And this is what Buddha means by conventional reality. We understand it when it comes to, say, making a cake. and you put 3 eggs in, and your friend is looking on, no, Robina, it's wrong. You did it wrong. So, before you go further, you'll say, well, what do you mean wrong? Who says 3 eggs is wrong? So you've got to go back to the source, don't you? Which is the recipe. It's very logical. You can't just look in the sky and decide in your own mind, well, I think 3 eggs is right. No, that's just abstract and meaningless and random. You have to refer it to something. This is a really powerful point. We get it when it comes to learning music, math, cooking. Somebody has presented the laws of botany. So then there's a way to, so if you want to grow a rose bush, you don't just make it up. I decide what's a rose and I decide how to do it. You can if you like, but you probably won't get a rose bush. You've got to follow the rules of the botanists who have found it to be so that if you do this and this and this, you'll get a rose bush. So if you're learning Bach's music, it's the same. You're playing the piano and your teacher says you just played the wrong note. And you don't say, who says it's wrong? I can play whatever note I like. You can, but you won't play Bach. So what do you do to discover what the right note is? You open your eyes and you look at the music on your music stand right in front of you. And you see the notes that Bach has written. So the agreement there is that Bach's music is the law you're using to follow. You don't have to play Bach. You can play whatever sound you like. But if you want to play Bach, you abide by Bach's rules. You agree. There's an agreement that that's the way to play the music. When you want to bake a chocolate cake, you agree on the recipe. So what's right conventionally is a convention. It's an agreement between us. If you're learning math, and you say 1 + 1 is 4, and your teacher says, no, it's 2, and you say, no, I can decide what I like, you can. But it's not going to be helpful, because the world won't agree with you. So conventional reality is really powerful. It means it's by agreement. Conventional reality is by agreement. We have decided that that's called a thermos. We have agreed that 1 + 1 is 3. We have agreed that this is how you grow a rose bush. It's conventional reality. Well, that's how Buddha's talking. So from the conventional point of view, there are ways the world exists according to Buddha's observation, not he didn't create it. One of those is that actually there is no such thing as a creator. It's a misconception. It's an embellishment. He agrees there is enlightened mind. He agrees there is all-knowing, omniscient, all-compassionate mind. The Christians call it God, and then they give the extra job to God, that energy of being a creator. No, Buddha also agrees that's called, but he calls it a Buddha. And then every person can become one of those. And you don't need to be a creator, because the law of karma is another thing he says. This is his observation. There is the law of karma runs the universe. He didn't make it up. He didn't create it. He's not forcing it down our throats. It's a law, like math, like botany. It's a law. He's observed it. He's articulated it. And he's saying, if we live according to this law, and you want to be happy, then you'll sow all the seeds in your mind that will bring you happiness. And you have to test that and prove it. So according to the rules of karma, this is right and that is wrong. It's not some absolute right, some absolute wrong. It's by agreement. So this is the way things exist, Buddha says. And then he says things are impermanent. That's a powerful way that things exist. But we have a misconception that things are permanent. We have a misconception that we think things don't change. So there are all these, he's saying our mirror, the mind, is polluted with the view of the misconception of permanence, the view of creator, the view of no cause and effect. Our minds are polluted with those, not to mention polluted by attachment and anger. All these misconceptions in our mind are the views we hold in our mind that then we use to interpret the world out there. And he says they're misconceptions. So misconception is very simple. It means a thought in the mind that isn't in sync with the reality. So you think 1 + 1 is 3. In reality, according to the laws of math, the answer is 2. So karma is like that. It's a natural law, and it's the way things exist. Impermanence is the way things exist. And Buddha's saying we have these misconceptions in our mind that not only don't see this reality, but have made up our own opposite fantasy. And these are why we suffer, because we're continually, with these misconceptions, we're bumping into reality and things don't work. So it's a very logical thing, but we've got to think it through. So Buddha is saying the way to get happy is to get in touch with reality. And reality according to whom? Well, according to Buddha's observation, but don't believe him. He's just presenting what he's seen, and he provides these findings for us. And then it's up to us to prove it to be true. That's practice. So then you've got ultimate reality. You've got conventional reality. And then it leads you to the subtlest level of reality, the subtlest level, the final way, ultimate final way that things actually exist. So the way to understand that in the framework of the whole path is in this idea of the mind there being misconceptions in our mind. And one of the ways these misconceptions function, the emotional afflictions, they embellish what is there. As Lama Zopa says, delusions in general, and the branch delusions like attachment and anger, as well as the subtlest one, the ego grasping, they all share the job, the function of misrepresenting reality to us by embellishing what is there. As Lama Zopa says, the delusions decorate on top of what is there layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. When we can see this at work, we are on track with Buddha's view, and it won't be difficult to realize emptiness. It's not just referring to the ego grasping, the root delusion. It's all the delusions have that one job. They add bells and whistles on top of things. They embellish. And this is the cause of our suffering, because what we think exists doesn't. And so we bump into reality all the time, and then we get distressed. You know, like I say, it's like the example of you've got $50 note, but you're so convinced and have been for so long that it's actually 500. And it even appears to you as 500. So of course you're going to suffer every time, because you go to spend 500, get all the expectations, then you're disappointed. And this is how we've been doing it for eons, Buddha says. We have a certain view of how things are, but attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of something. So we grasp after it, believing it'll make us happy, and only get disappointed because it can't. Anger exaggerates the ugliness, and so we blame that person for our suffering. And that's just not valid. It's not accurate. They did harm us, yes, but they're not the main cause of our suffering. You know, all these views, they're misconceptions. When we can see this, we're on track. So when we can see this, it leads us easily to be able to comprehend intellectually the root delusion, ego grasping, the maripa, unawareness, ignorance, this primordial, deeply held misconception in the bones of our being, beyond being articulate. It's completely instinctive because it's so ancient, that totally, utterly believes that everything that exists, including the I, the self, have this concrete, solid nature. It's the simplest way to put it. In fact, they don't. So how then does this ego grasping exaggerate? How does it embellish? How does it decorate on top of what is there, characteristics that aren't there? Well, attachment decorates the deliciousness of the cake. It adds extra levels of deliciousness to the cake. It makes the cake appear back to us through the mirror of our mind, which is polluted by attachment, as divine and delicious in and of itself. That's how it appears to us, which is totally mistaken. It's like you're colorblind. You're seeing something wrong. Attachment embellishes and makes it more delicious than it is. So how does ego grasping, what does that decorate upon the delicious cake? Because ego grasping or ignorance is the root of attachment, and they're both there together. Because of ego grasping, we have attachment. So attachment is embellishing the deliciousness. Well, the ego grasping is causing that deliciousness to appear to come from the cake. We don't think that it's our attachment. We don't ever realize that it's our attachment in our mind that paints a picture of extra delicious. We see extra delicious. We don't realize it's our mind doing it. We think it actually that, and this is the way the ego grasping works, the ignorance, the root delusion, it embellishes, it causes the deliciousness to appear to come from the cake. That delicious cake exists on that plate independently of your mind seeing it as that. They say that's the subtlest way. It appears delicious. This is the word, isn't it? From its own side, from there, not from the mind, but from there. That's how the world appears to us. Everything appears to come from out there. And if you realize that the mind is the mirror and how everything appears is merely a reflection. What's out there is a reflection of what's in our mind. But we don't think that our mind plays any role at all. That's the shocking part. We think we're this innocent victim and this delicious cake has been plonked in front of us. And what choice do I have but to eat it? Look at it, begging me to eat it. It's all the cake's fault. That's how the world appears. This is, Lama Yeshe would say, it's schizophrenic. Really true. Like we're this innocent victim plodding through life. And good things happen and bad things happen, has nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my mind. I play no role in it. It's kind of dumped upon me. That's how we think the world is. That's how the world appears to us. And that's because of the root delusion existing out there in and of itself, in its own character, from its own side, from itself. Intrinsically, inherently, independently, in particular, independent of my mind calling it that. That's the root mistake. So attachment embellishes the deliciousness of the cake. And when you've got a stomach full of 5 pieces, now aversion embellishes the ugliness of the cake. But ignorance, the root delusion, which is coming along at the same time, that embellishes the very actual, I think, ontological status of the delicious cake or ugly cake itself. These delusions they add bells and whistles onto everything. So as they say, finally the view is when we've got the two truths together. So right now we have conventional reality, but the actual view we have is actually an exaggerated, distorted, wrong view that over-exaggerates everything. And then there's the ultimate reality, But we have the wrong view of nihilism that thinks there's nothing there. So we go between these two extreme views of nothingness and over-exaggerated somethingness. So the job is to lessen, to move away in towards the middle way, loosening the grip of ego grasping, removing all the bells and whistles from our mind, or clearing our mind so we see things more clearly, moving towards the middle way. And then the view of nihilism, stopping and realizing that is emptiness, and these two eventually come together, dependent arising and emptiness, until eventually they come simultaneously. That's when you're Buddha, when the two truths appear simultaneously, conventional and ultimate reality come together. So the more extreme views we have, the more suffering, the more crazy. And we go between these extreme views, even emotionally, like up and down like yo-yos, you know, when you're full of attachment and everything's going beautifully, like you're in heaven and bliss, because you're exaggerating everything. And then the bubble bursts and he leaves you and you could crash down to despair. And now you run towards nihilism and want to kill yourself because now you're exaggerating all the bad things. So we're not in touch with reality. It's very simple, one way or another. So the thing we have to learn to do is see our mind. Brand new idea for us. Know the contents of our mind. Know the names of the different thoughts in the mind, second by second, because they are the source of my happiness and suffering. So things appear to us according to the karma we have created. So let's say, you know, due to some past negative karma with a person 57 lives ago, and they were mean to you, let's say, then they created a karmic connection with you back then, 57 lives ago, and then you meet them in this life. Well, even from the first second of meeting them, they will appear ugly to you. So one, that's to do with your past karmic appearance, your karmic connection with that person. They harmed you in the past. And two, you meet them again and instantly the karma ripens and they appear ugly. And then you embellish that ugliness now because it's not getting you what your attachment wants. So now you have more aversion. So you keep the whole ball rolling, you know. If you meet a person and they appear wonderful to you, it's because they've been kind to you in the past. I always think of Mr. Trump. Millions of people trust every word he says and adore him. And millions of people don't trust a single word he says and hate him. The same person, but he's got different karma with different people. I mean, someone like the Dalai Lama, even a holy being, a Buddha, you know, the bodhisattvas go from life to life to life to life, hooking sentient beings, making a karmic connection with us so that when they are Buddha, they can drag us along to enlightenment. So we can deduce that if we like the Dalai Lama, that he appears lovely to us, that means he consciously was kind to us when he hooked us. But look at the millions of people, like the Chinese communists, who hate him. He must have used wrathful methods to hook them. He hooked them, but they can't stand him. This is very much the way past karma affects how we see things now. And then due to the delusions that arise, we just increase it and make it worse, you know, and believe in our karmic appearances. So someone ever says, we have to stop believing in our karmic appearances. It's very powerful. So without seeing our mind and then without understanding the mind, this all makes no sense. So it's a very specific view, isn't it? But this mirror one is very powerful. That your mind, you know, is a mirror, and how everything appears in the mirror, appears back to you in your mirror. Shocking. Is dependent upon what's in the mirror. That's shocking to us. Or as they say in Buddhist psychology, things appear to you in the aspect of whatever's in the mind. I mean, we can prove this, You wake up one morning and you're happy. Things look lovely. Next morning you're depressed. Things look ugly. Same thing looks ugly, because the whole world has this shape according to what's in your mind. It's very evident, but we don't join the dots, It's very clear that our mind plays the main role, but it's very hard to really see it and to apply it every day. So like I'm saying, even conventionally, we're in la la land. So at least to get things right conventionally will already bring a lot of happiness, fulfillment, contentment. Abiding by the laws of karma causes you to calm down, and then you practice ethics, and that makes your mind happy, and you don't create causes for future suffering. And then you start to work on your mind, and you start to look at attachment and aversion, and you start to change those. You get even happier, because as you work on your mind and your body and your speech, you become happier right now. Forget about the future. And then you get bodhicitta, and then you go to the 6 perfections, and then you start to realize emptiness. So it's step by step, you're moving along this path, this mental path, getting things right conventionally, which leads us now to get things right finally. It's all about the mind, which doesn't mean things don't exist. This is the tricky part, In other words, as Lama Rinpoche says, when you realize the emptiness of the cup, my thermos, let's say, from the side of the thermos, there's not an atom there of thermosness. But conventionally, it still functions exactly as you defined it. It keeps your tea warm. So emptiness, in other words, doesn't reject existence. And that's the extreme view of nihilism. It's just nonsense. We assume if it's empty, it's nothing. No. If it's empty, it exists. Because things are empty, they exist. So these two truths come together. And that's where the Four Noble Truths, that's where the Heart Sutra comes in. So Buddha tells us, he's going through this list, isn't it? He's sitting in meditation and his disciples are having a conversation. They're actually channeling his thoughts. It's his teaching. And it's basically a listing of all the different categories of phenomena according to the Buddhist view of the universe. The five aggregates, which is the way Buddha presents the 5 components of a person. Then you've got the 12 links and the 4 Noble Truths and so on and so forth, all these categories of phenomena. So before going into that listing, Buddha Avalokitesvara says he takes the first of the 5 aggregates, the first of these 5 components that make up a person, which is called form, which basically refers to the physical. He says form is empty. And then he says emptiness is form. And then he says emptiness is nothing other than form, and form is nothing other than emptiness. Well, all he's saying is that where you find form, or anything for that matter, thermos is empty. Emptiness is thermos. Thermos is nothing other than emptiness. Emptiness is nothing other than thermos. Anything, you can say anything there. What he's saying is thermos, what we conventionally call thermos, is empty of existing intrinsically, in and of itself. Then he flips it over and he says, where you will find the emptiness of inherent form, that's spelling it out. He just says emptiness is form. He means where you find the emptiness of form is where nothing other than right there on the form, on the thermos. So thermos has a characteristic called the emptiness of inherent thermos. What's called a thermos conventionally lacks a characteristic called inherent thermos. Where you find conventional thermos, you will find right there emptiness of inherent thermos. Then you flip it over. Where you find in emptiness of inherent thermos, you will find right there, that characteristic of emptiness of inherent thermos, you will find it right there on conventional thermos. That's what he's saying. So you can't have one without the other. Whereas as soon as we hear there's no thermos, we chuck the baby out the bathwater. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Ah, well, there's no thermos, there's no I, there's no this, there's no that. And we can be forgiven for thinking that because the words are subtler than we realize. So we chuck the baby out the bathwater. That's the worst mistake. It's the worst mistake. So if you're saying that there is a phenomenon that does exist called the emptiness of inherent thermos, where are you? Everything has to exist somewhere. Everything has to exist somewhere. So if you state there does exist a phenomenon called the absence of inherent thermos, where would you look for that phenomenon? Nowhere else but on the conventional thermos. It's a really simple example, even a simple concept. You'll say, my thermos is black, or my thermos has blackness, you know? So wherever you find thermos, you will find that blackness. And now swap it over. Wherever you find blackness, where will that exist? Nowhere but your thermos. If you say there is black existing, it's a really good question. Oh, black exists, you'll say. Black exists, you'll say. It's a really good example. Black exists. That's a general statement of truth. It's a general statement of truth. Black exists. Now, what if you want to have a direct experience of black? It means you have to locate a thing that possesses blackness, don't you? You don't just go, oh, black exists. Where? Oh, in the sky, somewhere, black exists. No, you got to home in and you got to point out, in this case, a thermos that possesses blackness. So thermos is blackness, blackness is thermos, thermos is nothing other than blackness, and blackness is nothing other than thermos. You can't have one without the other. Well, emptiness of inherent existence is another characteristic of this thermos. Everything that exists possesses the characteristic of being empty of inherently existing. Everything that exists possesses that characteristic. Everything. A self. I am empty. Emptiness is I. I am nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than I. So the thing to get used to here is emptiness isn't referring to nothingness. Emptiness is referring to a very rich, vivid thing that exists, the absence of intrinsic existence. That's the way to kind of get used to thinking. And of course, it just sounds like clever words, you know, but it's got utter meaning, of course, which is what we have to get when we become yogis and to experience the taste of that. So are there any questions, please, so far?
Any questions so far, please consider writing them in the chat. I will read out loud. Or raise your hand.
So the one point I'm trying to get used to here, to get us used to, is that, again, I want to say it, is that this idea of the absence of something is a real thing. It's not just kind of, you know, that's why I use the example of cup. Your tea is empty, you know, my cup is empty. What you're talking about is a very real characteristic of that cup. where you expected tea to be, and you get a surprise, you go, oops, my cup is empty. So what you're saying is my cup lacks tea. So that absence of tea is a very real phenomenon that exists right there in my cup. So just let's say there is tea in your cup. You would say that tea is present in my cup, that the presence of tea exists. You could say it like that. The presence of tea exists in my cup. And now if you're expecting tea and you discover there's no tea, then now what is existing in the cup is the absence of tea. It's a very vivid phenomenon. It seems like a minus number, like a -2. It sort of sounds abstract, but it's a very vivid thing that appears to you. It's a very vivid thing that appears to you. And it's only going to appear in the mind of the person who expects tea. That's why eventually the greatest yogi, in their single point of concentration meditation, having thought about and meditated on this for a long time, one day, finally, the penny will drop. And they will discover right there on their eye the absence of inherent I. It's a powerful, vivid, incredibly powerful thing that they discover. The absence of the I that they thought since beginningless time existed there, but never has, couldn't, and doesn't exist there. The absence of that is a very rich, powerful, vivid thing to discover.
There's a question in the chat from Marlene asking, you talked about His Holiness and his karma with the Chinese. Is there group karma?
What? What's the question? Sorry.
Is there group karma? You talked about His Holiness and his karma with the Chinese. Is there something called group karma?
Yeah, I mean, we do things together as groups, don't we? A family is a group, you know, females are a group, Chinese communists is a group, Tibetans is a group, 6 foot tall people are a group. We all do things we do things as groups, don't we? So we experience things as groups, so we create karma as groups, yes. Yes, Alona.
Hi,
Yes.
Venerable. Thank you for your teachings.
Good, sweetheart.
I'm thinking, so my belief in this I that I have in my mind, that's why the objects appears to me in the same way, solid as well, right? You know what I mean? Because I have this sense of I, so this is, yeah, something solid, something that I have. So when I look at the objects outside of me, it have the same quality, similar qualities.
That's right. Yes, the Buddha talks about the selflessness of the person, and then there's also the selflessness of all the phenomena. So yes, exactly. Everything appears like that. Yourself appears to have an intrinsic nature. The thermos appears to have an intrinsic nature. Everything appears like that. Yes.
Because it's my mirror.
Well, your mirror is your mind, because in your mind, your mirror is polluted by the view of ignorance, the view of Marimpa. Everything, including your own I, will appear to you as having an independent. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Good, darling. Thank you.
Great.
What else, baby? I mean, of course, these are just hearing them for the first time. I say it's just pure intellect. Of course, it's intellectual, but so is 1 + 1 is 2 intellectual until you understand it. So you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start with the theories. You've got to start with the words, you know. I mean, we all know that. Words are powerful. You can't just make up the words you think. You've got to agree upon those words, have proper definitions, and then slowly we put meat on the bones of those words, you know, and that takes time. So, but the thing, you know, the thing is, the general idea is that our mind has misconceptions in it. Our mind has valid conceptions in it too, which are our saving grace. love and compassion and kindness are valid concepts because they're in sync to some degree with reality. The virtuous states of mind are related very strongly to dependent arising. Dependent arising means interdependence. And when two people are getting along, it's obvious they're being loving and kind and generous and forgiving, aren't they? And those are conceptual states of mind, but they're valid because there's a sense of connectedness with the other person. But when the delusions are there, there's no sense of connectedness. There's a very vivid sense of poor, self-pity me and mean, ugly you, you know? And that's because the delusions are running rampant. So there's no view of, but whereas the virtues are closer to reality, you know. But they are still not all the way. They've got still more work to do, because until you realize emptiness, you can still have compassion, but still the compassion is for coming from my self-existent compassion in my self-existent mind for use, for self-existent you know. It's still got a view of self-existence there, but relatively valid concepts. They're relatively valid. It's a stepping stone. And all of this is the Buddha's approach to how to get happy. Keep it simple. There's nothing fancy. This is the method to get happy, because why we're unhappy is because we've got misconceptions and we act upon those misconceptions. So keep making a mess, harming others, blaming other people. This is what continues our suffering, you know. So this is the method, finally, of realizing the marvelous nature of our own mind. You know, this is the thing, it's very encouraging in Buddhism to read about and to try to think about the astonishing potential that our own minds have to be radiant and clear and blissful and joyful and compassionate and wise. They're our true nature. They are our true nature. This is very encouraging. It should give us courage to keep working, to not give up, you know. That's the experiential point of all this. I'm just being clever philosophically.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When we realize emptiness, is that after we have realized time or separately?
Your voice froze for a moment last.
All right.
Ask the question again.
Yeah, when we get a realization of what karma is and what it does to our lives, does it come and then after that some sort of direct realization of emptiness, or do they come at the same time, so to speak, in the same sequence, understanding karma, understanding emptiness, or could you understand karma before and then later emptiness?
Like I was saying, the Lamrim is presenting Buddha's findings from the experiential point of view of his own observation. So the first one we think about is impermanence, and then we think about karma, and then we think about the mind and the delusions, and then we think about bodhicitta, and then we have the 6 perfections, and then we blah, blah, blah. They go step by step. So necessarily, they go step by step in order of the capacity to realize them. It just goes without saying. It's like, you know, understanding karma, you finally, put it this way, you won't finally really understand karma until you're a Buddha. But karma is a really good example. It's one of, the 3 levels of dependent arising that Buddha teaches that are the best thinking to do to get us to realize emptiness. And these are arguments with the prevailing views at the time before he went off in his own direction. And so karma is a brilliant example of this first level of dependent arising, which is that everything exists, or I exist, in dependence upon causes. So there are external causes, but the real learning here is that the causes from my own past actions. So that is a very powerful realization. It's not a complete realization of karma, no way, but it's a powerful realization of karma, which causes you to become less of a victim, which means it's chipping away at ego grasping. Explicitly, it's helping you develop more virtue and morality and good ethics. And because you don't want future suffering, you stop harming others. But implicitly, it's chipping away at ignorance, because karma is a brilliant example of cause and effect, and cause and effect is the first level dependent arising. So implicitly, it's leading you to realize emptiness, not explicitly. It can't be, because each of these arguments, each of these views is quite specific. So you've got to have very direct, opposite arguments in order to realize them. Then when you look at the mind and you start to realize these emotional afflictions causing you so much suffering, but then when you understand more deeply, it's more implicit, the way the delusions function, as misrepresenting things, as embellishing things. This also is leading you to help to understand emptiness. So the step by step, but not directly, no. Each realization has its own logic, its own arguments, its own specific antidotes. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you, Venerable. Thank you.
Okay. Good. What else, dearest people?
Ariella has a question.
Yes, my dear, talk to me.
Good evening, Venerable Robina. Thank you.
Yes.
Ariella has many questions.
Good, sweetheart.
I do not understand emptiness. I guess
So whatever.
we'll have to hear it a
Yeah.
million more times.
That's right.
But before even I get there, the definition, if we can say, of lack of inherent existence or inherent existence, I can't put my mind.
That's right, exactly. I understand exactly. So then what the Buddha is saying is, one simple way to put it, this is the subtlest meaning, but actually it sometimes seems easy to understand it. Do you agree if one day you wake up and you've got a headache? So, no, forget the headache. One day you wake up and you're just miserable, right? You're just miserable. So when you're in the traffic and you're feeling anxious and worried and miserable, and you see the red light, you get very distressed. Would you agree with that, Ariella? So tomorrow you wake up and you're feeling very relaxed and easygoing and patient, and the same red light, it doesn't disturb you so much. Can you agree with that?
Yes.
Well, that's proving emptiness. That the red light one day appears ugly to you, and on another day it appears not too bad. And what's that dependent upon is your mind being different each day. Would you agree with that?
So it's not the red light.
Do you agree with that?
My mood.
No, do you agree with that? What I just said?
Can you say it again, please?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. One day the red light appears ugly to you.
Yes.
And one day the red light doesn't appear so bad. The one thing that's different is what's in your mind, isn't it? One day anger is in your mind, and the next day patience is in your mind. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So all Buddha's telling you is that red light lacks any particular, it lacks a concrete, solid nature of being good or bad. It's empty. It lacks a concrete nature of good or bad, that it depends upon your mind. That's how everything exists. That's what it means, simply speaking. We think the red light exists out there as ugly and horrible and got nothing to do with you. But next day, because your mind is different, the red light appears differently. That's proving that there's no red light from its own side, that red light exists in dependence upon your mind labeling it this or that. Do you get that, roughly speaking?
Yes, that's a good example. So now, if I return to the thermos, it is always there to contain my liquid. So how does that?
Okay.
compared to the red light.
So the thermos, yeah, the red light will still function as stopping you to drive, isn't it? It'll still function as a red light, whether you like it or not. So if you think this is an ugly thermos, this is the whole point. The thermos appears to you. Now there are different things. The thermos, for example, if it appears to me as a very pretty thermos. No. Okay. We think the red light has a special characteristic in the red light itself. But the Buddha would say, if you start to analyze, you're not going to find that it's a merely labeled red light. That's one way of putting that. The thermos is merely labeled. There's nothing in the thermos that gives it the intrinsic characteristic of being a thermos, that it's merely labeled a thermos, but nevertheless, it functions still to hold your tea. The red light appears this way, appears that way. That boy appears beautiful to somebody, and to the ex-girlfriend, he appears ugly. Everything is like that. Everything is chopping and changing according to what's in our mind. So the final understanding is that not everything is, we think, and that means, Buddha says, we think things have a very concrete, independent nature, in particular, independent of our mind thinking it. So that delicious cake, when we got full of attachment for that delicious cake, it appears to us that the deliciousness is coming from the cake, but it's not. It's your mind, your attachment, calling it delicious. Because 5 pieces later, it now appears disgusting. And the difference isn't the cake. The difference is what's in your mind. So the conclusion is, everything functions in the way we label it, but ultimately nothing has an intrinsic nature. It's not set in stone. It's merely labeled red light, thermos, cake, me, etc., etc. So knowing this, when bad things happen, instead of thinking, like my friends in prison, I always use example, they're stuck in prison. Prison on a conventional level functions to make you pretty miserable. The food is horrible, the housing is horrible, they're not pleasant neighbors, you wouldn't choose to live there, but you can't escape. So you got the choice to change your view of prison, and you can learn to see it as good, because prison doesn't have an intrinsic nature of being ugly. That's the broad way of applying this in daily life. What do you think, Ariella?
I feel a little bit more comfortable, but for
Good.
sure, there's much more. Thank you, Venerable.
That's very helpful. That's exactly right. This is how we try to apply it. It kind of makes his mind more spacious. It makes us take more responsibility. Yes, it is ugly. Yes, he was an unkind boyfriend, but let's see how I can see it differently. And why we can see it differently is because our mind is the most powerful. If the Buddha's saying, and this is where it sounds a bit intellectual again, if prison were intrinsically ugly, if it were ugly in the bones, in the walls, in the bricks, then you could never be happy there. You could never change your mind. It can only always ever make you miserable. But we know that's not true. So by the fact that we can change our view of something proves the power that the mind is the most powerful thing, not the object. Whereas when we are victims and feel miserable and get angry and upset, we're like these innocent victims who blame the cake and blame the ex-boyfriend and blame the ugly. We blame all the outside and we feel paralyzed. We can see the suffering in the world. It's like that, isn't it? That's the experiential implication of this idea. You understand, Ariella?
Yes, I think I'm having a little bit of a problem understanding the word inherit in the inherent existence. Because for me, inherent is, I got it from my parents. It's somebody gives you something.
I think that's a different meaning. This one.
That's why I guess I'm confused.
No, I think that's the word inherited. Inherent means something in the thing itself that's fixed. Intrinsic. Okay. Good. Okay,
Very okay. Thank you.
Good, darling. Pleasure. Hello, Nilashi. Talk to me. Yes. Hello, darling.
So I have been teaching some underprivileged children here in India.
Yeah.
And I came across Lama Zopa Rinpoche's 16 universal values that one could undertake in a school setting. And the kind of situations these children come from, where they actually have their first meal in the school, and some of them even fall out while having a group song in the morning.
Yes.
Can you give an example of something of an activity, or how one approaches this topic of emptiness with them? Because as a teacher and as a primary caretaker in some sort, because these children find their refuge in school because their parents also live in a more vulnerable state. How as a teacher do I think about emptiness with those children who sometimes stay empty stomach, who also go through a lot of violence, and it just is so difficult to see it as karma alone. And I want to
100%.
approach.
Don't even worry about karma. I think forget karma, because that can be really misunderstood. And I think in India, especially, it's very concrete, isn't it? So don't worry about that one. But my feeling is, I think if you look at your children, you're going to find some of these children suffer less than the others. Have you found that their mind, and that's because their mind is more flexible, because their mind maybe goes more towards patience or kindness rather than sadness and unhappiness. I think we can see this. You can see some of those children, maybe the child who's got the worst situation mightn't be the most unhappy. And the difference is because of their mind. That's proving that, my friends in prison, all in the same situation, some of them totally miserable, angry, depressed, and don't have any feeling that they can change their mind. And the way things appear to them as really ugly, they believe it's true. But another person in prison knows their mind is powerful, and they can change the way they see their experience, and literally they learn to see good things. This is the power of the mind. This is proving emptiness. So I think with children, that's something manageable. You can train them to be optimistic. You can train them to, and that means also you have to praise them and love them and give them courage. But we can change our minds. I think this is the essence, because you see, that's the essence of the practice of understanding emptiness, that we're not set, things are not set in stone. No matter how bad they are, we can find a different way to see things. And that's what gives courage. And that you can say in a totally unreligious way. I mean, as soon as you mention karma in India, that's no good at all. It doesn't help, I think, do you understand my point? You see yourself, you can see yourself. I mean, we know in our own lives, we have some people who are more patient and more kind, and their life is quite different because of that, because they're literally, their mirror is reflecting in a different way through the mirror of patience and the mirror of kindness. But people have got lots of depression or lots of anger or lots of self-pity, as well as having difficult lives. But we assume, you see, our trouble is the materialist view is everything comes only from the external. So we assume because a child has a terrible external world, they've got to be miserable and unhappy, but it doesn't follow. Some kids can have a happier mind and a wiser mind. So we've got to realize the mind is so powerful, and we can learn to see things differently, which brings optimism and courage. What do you think, Nilashi?
I'm trying to get the hang of what you're saying in its essence. If I were to give you an example of a child coming to you and telling you that they haven't had a meal for last 2 days, how would you approach that situation?
You mean apart from giving them a hug and a meal? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, there's also the other wing of the bird. We're talking the wisdom wing, and we're talking the compassion wing, Nilashi. So the answer to most of your things is be kindly and loving and give them a meal, surely. And then when there is leisure and time and their belly is full, then you can talk about the mind. The wisdom wing comes second. It seems to me the first one is your kindness, is the compassion wing. I mean, that's surely what you do. You don't have to give a lecture to them about when they're hungry. Give them, I'm not trying to be sarcastic. Kindness is the most powerful one. And then when you're given kindness and a nice warm and a belly full of food, then you can learn to know their mind and help understand their mind, because that's your job as their teacher. Are we communicating?
Yes.
In other words, for you, Nilashi, the application of emptiness, don't just see a poor, starving child. That's a definition you put on the whole of that person. You've got to be able to, that's one factor about them, but you've got to learn to see their mind, which is much subtler. And that's got nothing to do with their poverty. That's who they are. And when you discover who they are and their mind and their qualities, you can be the best teacher on the planet. But fill their belly first. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nilashi. Who else, people? What else is there? You see, this type of the application of this practice is the one that when difficult things happen, this is when it's really taught seriously, isn't it? In the Bodhisattva path, is how we can, the whole approach called transforming problems into happiness. But, you know, it's an advanced practice. So Nilashi can't just go and give a lecture to one of her children about that. You know, give them the meal first, make them happy and be loving and kind, and the same for ourselves. But the more we understand the power of the mind, our own mind, which means the power of our interpretations of things, then as we progress in our practice and become very familiar with our mind and bad things happen, it is the perfect opportunity to learn to interpret it differently. This is a powerful practice, and this is applying the teachings about emptiness. Because if things were set in stone, and that's what we think when we're miserable, you know, you're in a miserable relationship, got a lousy husband who's mean and unkind, and you cannot see any option. You are totally miserable. You're paralyzed in this relationship. It would be like a joke if someone said you can leave him. And it would be even more of a joke to hear that you could change your interpretation of him. We're paralyzed. That's the typical way that we all are. We're locked in that miserable job. We're locked in the miserable relationship. We feel hopeless because we can't see how we can see things differently. This is the essence of Buddha's approach. So as we start to practice, then we would decide, yeah, maybe simply don't even change my mind, but leave this dumb husband, you know, leave this dumb job. We don't need to be there. We're not set in. We don't have to be just going to the miserable job every day. But if we can't change the job, if we can't change the husband, if we can't get out of that prison, then the only option is to change your mind. And this is the miracle. This is the power. But if we're victims and hopeless, we can't see this. It's an advanced practice. It means you know the power of your mind, and you know that when you can change the way you see things, that's how you become happy. This is the essence of Buddha's practice. And people do this every day without even thinking it's called Buddhism, you know. We can learn to change our mind. We can learn to see things differently. This is absolutely rooted in the understanding of emptiness. And this is the logic. If, like, you know, I think of my friends in prison, in these nightmarish environments, unable to get out of prison, accused of something they didn't do, everything's horrible. But, you know, as my friend Sunny said, I knew I had the choice to change the way I saw things. So the point is this: if things were set in stone, and that's a great analogy in the West, If things were set in stone, if that prison is absolute, in an absolute sense, horrible, then there's nothing you will ever do to be happy. And that's what we believe in life. We believe it's the outside world. Totally believe it's the outside world that causes us happiness, and totally believe it's the outside world that causes us suffering. And there's nothing we can do. No, we can change our mind. And ordinary people are doing it every day. We just don't join the dots, that's all. And Buddha is just an expert at this, that's all. But it's proving that prison or anything else doesn't have an intrinsic nature, doesn't have an independent nature, doesn't have a concrete nature, is not set in stone. That's what emptiness is all about. Things are not set in stone, so we can see them differently. That's the idea. And that just keeps getting subtler and subtler and subtler until the point where we have realized emptiness of the I and everything else. And then, as Lama Zopa says, when you've realized the emptiness, and everyone has to learn these words, of the I, let's say yourself or your situation or the thermos, doesn't matter. And that means you realize that there is nothing from the side of the I, from the side of the thermos, that makes it that. When you realize that, it's as if there is no I, but conventionally there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. These are the two truths perfectly together. Of course, it's intellectual force, and of course, it's confusing to us initially, like anything. Like when you start talking to me in computer language, I get confused because I haven't learned the words. So I have to learn the words first, then you can have a conversation. So again, the broader point that Buddha is making across the board, not just in relation to emptiness, is that the neurotic states of mind, the deluded states of mind, and he articulates these very precisely, it's their nature to misconceive things. Due to them being in the mirror, our mind is polluted, our mirror is polluted by attachment, polluted by anger. So when whatever appears to you from out there appears through the attachment, through the aversion, through the depression, through the low self-esteem, whatever's in the mind. If your virtue plays more of a role, then you see the world in a very, very, very different way. You're far more optimistic, you're more compassionate, you're more courageous, you're more confident, and you're more happy. I mean, I can never get past the example of a Dalai Lama himself. We love to put the Dalai Lama up in the sky, oh, that's the Dalai Lama. Excuse me, he's the proof of the pudding of every word we're talking about here. You look at his life since he was 16. He was given the job to run his country. And he hasn't stopped, and he's now 70, he's 87 now, like it's 70 years ago, Not quite 70, whatever it is, 35, 45, 50. Yeah, something like 70 years. He hasn't stopped with optimism, trying every method possible to help things change. And he never loses enthusiasm. No matter how he tries to act like an ordinary person and tell us he gets angry, but he can't convince us, because it's evident he's a happy fellow. It's evident to anybody. So we've got to ask the question, what is it about him? What is it? What's the distinction between him and us that enables him to be able to go through the life that he's had without getting depressed, without getting angry, without, giving up, is because he's worked on his mind. I mean, forget being a Buddha, just worked on his mind. Understands karma, understands compassion, understands emptiness. That's the proof of the pudding. Speaking simply. So surely that's encouraging to us, because he can do it, we can do it too. Just one step at a time. One step at a time. Knowing our own minds is the key. That's the key. It's the key. Being our own therapist, like Lamisi puts it, is the key to success. Knowing our own mind. And that means distinguishing, very simply, distinguishing between the delusions and the virtues. That's it. It's almost embarrassingly simple, conceptually speaking, anyway. But that's the key to success. And that means every second of the day, there are two things going on. There's the outside world, and then there's your mind interpreting. And that's your job, to fix that one. To see the mind, to label things accurately, and to lessen the delusions and grow the virtues. That's the bottom line. What else, people?
Fabio, did you have a question?
Who is there?
Fabio was raising his hand.
Okay, good. Talk to me, sweetheart. Where is he? I can't see him.
He may have stepped away.
Looks like he has.
Yeah.
So what else, people? What else? Curious people. Any questions? Fabio, yeah. Okay, what's your question, Fabio? Just write it down, sweetheart.
Oh, there was a question in the chat.
Yeah, go.
When the Buddhas hook people using wrathful methods, doesn't that create the cause for the beings to generate hatred for the Buddhas? And then what will cause them massive future suffering and to be separated from the Buddhas?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of good, sounds like correct theory, but there's the example. I mean, there's this story. I mean, well, I mean, like, could, yeah, sure, could do that. Why not? Could, yes. So what's the point of it? So anyway, Fabio, go on, talk to me. What's your question, Fabio?
Hi, Venerable Robina. I was thinking about compassion and emptiness. When we deal with very difficult people, how do we act from the emptiness point of view? What is the antidote?
The emptiness point of view, not the compassion point of view, yeah?
Exactly. I mean, because I know, for example, when we have someone trying to hurt us or trying to hurt the people we love, we usually are required to develop compassion, but sometimes it doesn't work. It's like if there is an obstacle in developing compassion, how emptiness can help us.
I think forget even emptiness. I think the most powerful way, and this is a step that we all skip, I think, Fabio. The very first level of practice in the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's telling us, when we read the Four Noble Truths, we know he's talking to us. Of course, he's talking about everybody else, but we have to learn it. And he's telling us, he's saying, Robina, honey, you suffer because of your delusion. So forget karma, okay? He says, you suffer because of your attachment. And you're suffering because of your anger, and you're suffering because of your jealousy. That's what he's telling us. Would you agree with that? Buddhist
Yes.
teaching? Okay. So I think if we skip that step, and we do, because if we didn't skip it, what that would bring, they call it renunciation, which means you know you're suffering so deeply, you are revolted by it, and you want to give it up. That's what I think we would call compassion for yourself. But we skip that one, and we kind of just get guilty about being angry and depressed and jealous and attached. So then when you look at the outside world and you see shitty, angry, jealous, attached people, then we're just going to get angry with them. Of course we would. But if you have not skipped that first step, and you really have compassion for yourself because you realize you suffer because of your own delusions, then when you see someone else who's angry and jealous and resentful, you will only have compassion for them because they're harming themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
We miss that one. That's the biggest one we miss. We don't have compassion for ourselves. We just get guilty and fundamentalist. Oh, I'm bad. I'm attached. I'll go to hell. We're obsessed with negativity and guilt. And then we do have compassion for some people, but only the nice people. But that's why we can't cope with people who, we get angry with people. We get resentful about people. We have arrogance about people because we're always finding fault, because we still do it about ourselves. We're always finding fault. So we haven't even begun to get renunciation, which means we haven't really begun to understand our own suffering. Because if we did understand our own suffering, if we did understand our delusions, we'd be weeping with compassion for ourselves. And then we would only have compassion for the pedophile, for the crazy mother, for the evil father, for the wacky next door neighbor. You'd then be wiser, and you wouldn't be sentimental compassion. You'd do what you can to stop them from harming others, but you would have compassion for them because you can see nakedly that they are harming themselves. But we will never get that until we see our own suffering. And that's meant to be the first scope. We miss it. What do you think?
That's a clear answer.
Good. All right, Fabio.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, this is why we only have compassion for a few people, like the little pussycats and the doggy woggies and all the sweetie people. All we have is arrogance and anger towards the others. So we don't like them and we criticize them, and they so that means we haven't even begun to get renunciation, not even begun. You know, we haven't understood our own suffering yet. So really, that's quite a profound point, but we just don't get it. In the words, we have guilt instead, and then we have anger for everybody else. So we've got to keep looking. And if we understood, I mean, you know, if we could see the pain of our attachment and our anger and our jealousy and our depression, we do sometimes, but then we blame the other people for causing it. But to really know our own minds to that subtle degree, that really takes time. And this is the very first step. Forget compassion, forget emptiness, you know. We can't even get renunciation because we're not aware of our own minds enough, because we love to be angry. We love to find fault. We love to be arrogant. We love to point fingers at people, thinking we're so holy, which shows the hubris, you know. It shows we haven't yet got in touch with our own minds and our own pain. So this is the very first step, I tell you. And then it's not difficult to have compassion for others then. And you wouldn't want to point fingers because you know we're all in the same boat, you know. Yeah. This is the renunciation. This is junior school. So here we are talking emptiness, you know. Wow. So I think we can finish on that point. All right. Precious people. We do the lovely prayer, do His Holiness's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Thinking, yeah, wonderful. His Holiness so kindly writing these words, you know, for us. So we have these words, wishing that Lama Zopa Rinpoche shows the body, and so we can see his body and hear his speech again, because we need to be guided by these holy beings who are the example for us. This is the point. So Pila's teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. All right, people, that's it. That's enough. Thank you so much. Jang Chob, Sem Chob, Rinpoche, Ma Kie, Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Me Payang, Gong Ne, Gondu, Pabashog. And that's it. I think enough for now. Thank you so much, Lars. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Tara, thank you
Venerable.
much.
Thank you. See you all in June.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Venerable.
Much love.